Hello and welcome to this video on deductive argument forms or deductive types. Remember that deductive arguments are distinguished from inductive arguments because in inductive arguments the conclusion is a matter of probability or likelihood, whereas in deductive arguments the conclusion is not a matter of probability or chance. In other words, in a well-reasoned deductive arguments, if the premises are true, the conclusion must also be true. Remember that in deductive arguments we have this idea of necessity, where given that the premises are true, it must be the case, or the conclusion must necessarily follow. Let us begin our list of deductive argument forms or types with arguments based on mathematics. An argument based on mathematics is an argument based on some kind of mathematical calculation, computation, or measurement. Here's an example. The area of a triangle is the product of the base and the height divided by 2. Triangle A has base of 4. Triangle A has height of 8. Therefore, the area of triangle A is 16. Now, this is a logical argument. Notice that we have a conclusion, which is that the area of triangle A is 16. And to break it down, let's look at the premises. Premise 1 is that the area of a triangle is the product of the base and the height divided by 2. This is the famous A equals 1/2 B times H formula. Premise 2, triangle A has base of 4. And premise 3, triangle A has height of 8. And then we get our conclusion. When we perform that calculation or that computation, we get the conclusion that the area of triangle A is 16. Okay, let's go on to our next argument. This is an argument from definition. In an argument from definition, the conclusion relies or depends on the definition of a word or phrase. So basically the conclusion hangs on the specific definition of a word or a phrase. Here's an example. All bachelors are unmarried men. Tom is a bachelor, therefore Tom is not married. Notice that that conclusion depends on the definition of bachelors, and that is that bachelors are unmarried men. Our next argument types are syllogisms. There will be 3 of these kinds of arguments. Let us begin by defining what a syllogism is. A syllogism is a very specific type of argument, and they are defined as arguments with exactly 2 premises. That means no more or no less than 2 premises. Our Socrates example, all humans are mortal, Socrates is human, therefore Socrates is mortal. That is a syllogism because that has exactly 2 premises. So our first type of syllogism is a categorical syllogism. I'm going to use Hurley's definition here of a categorical syllogism. It is a syllogism in which a statement begins with one of the words, each statement begins with one of the words all, no, or some. And this is taken from section 1.3 of the 12th edition. Here's an example of that. All people who live in California are people who live in the United States. Some people who live in California are people who live in Long Beach. Therefore, some people who live in the United States are people who live in Long Beach. Notice that this does fulfill the definition of a categorical syllogism because each word, each statement begins with one of those words, all, no, or some. Our next type of syllogism, remember that syllogisms are arguments with exactly 2 premises. Again, remember that our Socrates argument was a syllogism because it has exactly 2 premises. And our next type is a hypothetical syllogism. A hypothetical syllogism is a syllogism that contains at least one conditional statement. And remember that a conditional statement is a statement of the form if-then. If you recall from our video on non-arguments, the last non-argument that we looked at was a statement of the form if-then. Remember that these parts have names. The if part is the antecedent and the then part is a consequent. So a hypothetical syllogism basically is just an argument that will have at least one of those statements. Here's an example. If Paris is in France, then the Eiffel Tower is in Europe. Paris is in France, therefore the Eiffel Tower is in Europe. Okay, notice that that does fulfill this definition. It has at least one conditional statement. The very first statement is a conditional statement. If Paris is in France, then the Eiffel Tower is in Europe. Here's another example. If my internet service is disrupted, then I cannot submit my logic homework. If I cannot submit my logic homework, I will get a bad grade in logic. Therefore, if my internet service is disrupted, then I will get a bad grade in logic. Notice that this also does fulfill the definition here of a hypothetical syllogism, because the definition is at least one conditional statement. This one happens to have all of the statements as conditionals, but it still fulfills that definition, so it is a hypothetical syllogism. Our next type of syllogism is a disjunctive syllogism, and a disjunctive syllogism is defined as a syllogism that contains a statement with the form either or. So it has to have that. Later on we'll see that this is a logical connective either or. Here's an example. Either Paris is the capital of France or Paris is the capital of Germany. Paris is not the capital of Germany, therefore Paris is the capital of France. Okay, so that is it for our deductive argument types or forms. I will see you next time, in which we will be discussing inductive argument types.